There is a version of Stanford Pines the show has never shown you directly, not the gruff, weather-beaten genius who steps out of the portal in Season 2, older and stranger and more difficult than anyone who knew him expected. Not the golden statue petrified mid-argument. Not the great uncle with 12 doctorates and a quantum destabilizer and 30 years of interdimensional survival behind him. There is an earlier version, the one that made all the others possible, and it lives on a beach in New Jersey with 6 fingers on each hand and a mind that could not stop moving and a specific, persistent loneliness that nobody around him had the vocabulary to address. That loneliness was the first domino. Tonight we are going through every domino that fell after it, the whole arc. The philosophy underneath the show, the way Stanford Pines built his life on the wrong foundation, without quite knowing where that foundation led, and walked step by step toward the same conclusion that a triangle demon had arrived at before Ford was born. So get comfortable, turn the lights down, we will be here a while, and if you have not subscribed to Pine Hat yet, it genuinely does help us keep making these. Stanford Filbrick Pines, 6 fingers on each hand, 12 doctorates, 30 years lost in the space between dimensions. Voiced by J.K. Simmons, who won a Behind the Voice Actors Award for the performance in 2015. On paper, by any reasonable external measure, the most extraordinary person in a show that is populated exclusively by extraordinary things. A man whose intelligence operates at such a remove from the ordinary register that it functionally separated him from every meaningful human connection he ever attempted. And the story of that separation, chosen and then imposed, and then rechosen, and then finally, after 30 years and an interdimensional apocalypse, partially and painfully undone, is the spine of this entire essay. Gravity Falls premiered on June 15, 2012, with a sneak peek episode on Disney Channel, and its official premiere on Disney Channel followed on June 29th. The second season, which ran from August 2014 through February 2016, aired across Disney Channel and Disney XD, ending with a series finale on February 15, 2016, that drew more than 2 million viewers and became, by most accounts, the most watched telecast Disney XD had ever aired. 2 seasons, 40 episodes, created by Alex Hirsch, who drew on his childhood summers with his twin sister Ariel Hirsch for the emotional core of the characters. Dipper Pines is based on Alex Hirsch himself as a child, who has described his younger self as a neurotic kid who would carry 16 disposable cameras everywhere he went. Mabel Pines is based on Ariel, who really did wear wacky sweaters. The show earned 100% on Rotten Tomatoes across both of its seasons, won 2 Emmy Awards, 3 Annie Awards, and a BAFTA Children's Award, and cultivated an adult fan base whose engagement with its philosophical and cryptographic layers is genuinely unusual for a program that aired on a children's cable network. Season 1 ran from June 15, 2012 through August 2, 2013. Season 2 ran from August 2014 through February 2016. Between those dates, the show accumulated a following that treated it less like entertainment and more like a system of hidden meaning to be decoded. A relationship encouraged by the layers of ciphertext embedded in the credits, the episode end cards, the journals, and the background art. The ciphers cycle through several different encoding methods across the show's run. Caesar substitution, where each letter is shifted a fixed number of positions through the alphabet. A simple positional cipher, where each letter becomes its numerical position in the alphabet. Atbash, where the alphabet is reversed so that A becomes Z and Z becomes A. And visionaire encryption, where a keyword shifts the encoding at each position of the message according to its own letters. Fans decoded these in real time as episodes aired, coordinating on forums and message boards and later social media, building community around the practice of close reading. The show rewarded that attention every time, which created a relationship between the program and its audience that is one of the more unusual things in the history of animated television, and that says something important about who Stanford Pines is. Because the show is organized the way Ford's mind is organized. Everything has meaning, nothing is arbitrary, the truth is encoded rather than stated directly, and you earn it by paying attention. But before we can talk about Ford in the depth this subject deserves, I want to be precise about what we mean when we use the word nihilism in this video's title. Because the word is doing specific philosophical work here, and I want to be honest about what that work is and where its limits are. Nihilism, in its most recognizable academic form, is the position that life has no objective meaning, no intrinsic value, no built-in purpose that arrives from outside the living creature. This is not a fringe or extreme view in the history of ideas. Friedrich Nietzsche spent significant portions of his career working through what he called the death of God, by which he did not primarily mean the literal end of religious belief, but the collapse of any external source of meaning, the recognition that the universe does not come with instructions embedded in it. Arthur Schopenhauer, writing before Nietzsche, argued that existence is fundamentally characterized by suffering, and that will, the blind, insistent, striving force he saw at the center of all living things, is neither purposeful nor good but simply compulsive. Both Camus and Sartre, working through the existentialist tradition in the mid-20th century, took something resembling nihilism as a starting point, and then argued about whether anything could be built on top of it. Camus said yes, through defiant absurdism, the conscious refusal to accept the universe's silence as the final word. Sartre said yes, through radical freedom and the terrifying weight of authentic choice. Others went darker. Some of them went considerably darker. The version of nihilism that Gravity Falls is interested in, the version the show builds its central villain from, and tests every major character against, is not the version you find in philosophy seminar rooms. It is the lived version. What does a consciousness look like when it has genuinely internalized the idea that nothing matters, not as a position to argue in a debate, but as an operational fact to act from? What happens when the absence of objective meaning is not a starting point for the construction of something new, but an ending point, a conclusion that erases the question of what to do next? The show's answer to that question is Bill Cipher. And the show's warning, the cautionary thread woven through Stanford Pines' entire arc, is that the same conclusion is available to humans who organize their inner lives around the wrong things for long enough, without quite noticing where the logic is taking them. Ford is not a nihilist. I want to say this plainly near the beginning because the title might send you in that direction. Ford believes in things. He believes in science, in empirical inquiry, in the intrinsic value of understanding the universe, in the importance of documentation and rigor, and the slow accumulation of reliable knowledge. He is, in the most meaningful available sense, a committed scientist and a passionate researcher who has spent his whole life trying to make the world more comprehensible. But the way he pursues those beliefs, in increasing isolation, with mounting distrust of every person around him, treating human connection as interference rather than as a necessary component of a complete and functional life, has the same structural shape as nihilism's endpoint, even when it does not share nihilism's philosophical conclusions. And the show, deliberately and persistently, places Ford close enough to Bill's position that a viewer paying attention can see the family resemblance between the lonely genius and the cosmic destroyer without the show ever having to announce it. The resemblance is structural, not philosophical. Both Ford and Bill build lives organized around abstraction rather than around specific people. Both treat the relationships they do form as primarily functional. Ford's relationships serve his research. Bill's relationships serve his plans. Both have arrived, through different routes and for different reasons, at a mode of existing in the world where other people are variables to be managed rather than sources of meaning in themselves. The difference is that Ford still has enough of his humanity intact to be recoverable from the edge. Bill, who burned his homeworld long before Ford was born, is not. This is a subtle and slowly built argument, and the show constructs it across 40 episodes and 30 years of in-universe backstory, not through explicit philosophical statement, but through pattern and consequence and the specific weight of accumulated choices. To trace it properly, you have to start at the beginning. Glass Shard Beach, New Jersey. Sometime in the 1950s, based on the decades of backstory that follow. The show does not give you a specific birth year for the Pines twins, and I am going to follow the research brief's discipline and not invent one, but mid to late 1950s is consistent with the surrounding timeline. Stan and Ford are born as identical twins, separated at arrival by 15 minutes, with Ford coming first. Identical in the technical biological sense, same genome, same parents, same hardscrabble working-class beach community, same starting conditions. Not equivalent. Ford was born with hexadactyly, 6 fingers on each hand. His identical twin, who shares his genome down to the last nucleotide, was born with the standard 5 fingers per hand. This is the show's foundational detail, and it repays more attention than it usually gets. 6 fingers on each hand, when your twin has 5, means you are different in a way that is immediately visible, that cannot be concealed or contextualized away, that announces itself every time you reach for something or someone reaches for you. And in a working-class beach community in mid-century New Jersey, being visibly different in a way that has no obvious explanation and no cultural framework to receive it is not a minor inconvenience. It is the organizing fact of your childhood social experience. The exclusion Ford experiences because of his hands is probably not primarily dramatic in the way exclusion gets dramatized on television. It is probably subtler than open cruelty, which would at least be legible and refutable. It is the hesitation before someone shakes his hand, the downward glance that people cannot quite suppress, the fraction of a second register of something unexpected, the choice of seating at lunch that always leaves Ford on the end. It is the accumulation of small signals that you are the one who requires an adjustment, the one whose presence comes with a slight complication, the one the group has to decide where to put rather than absorbing automatically. Over years, that kind of thing builds. It is slower than cruelty and more thorough. What Ford does with this experience is the first and most important thing the show tells you about him, and it is the foundation that everything else is built on. He decides to study the strange. He looks at the fact of his own anomaly, the 6 fingers that make him the exception to the expected pattern, and he converts it into an intellectual project. If the world contains things that do not fit the expected pattern, and if he himself is one of those things, then the study of anomaly and the study of himself are the same study. The 6-fingered hand that marks him as outside the ordinary becomes, through this conversion, a credential rather than a defect, the mark of a person who belongs to a different category. This is, as I said, a genuinely admirable response to a difficult situation. It is also the inaugural act of the pattern that will define Ford's life, and the pattern is this: taking something painful and personal and converting it into something intellectual and categorizable. Ford does this whenever the emotional register of his life becomes too much to navigate directly. He does it at Glass Shard Beach. He does it after the science fair. He does it during the years at Backups More. He does it in the portal. The conversions are genuine, the projects they produce are real, the knowledge accumulated is sometimes extraordinary, but the emotional residue of the original experience, the unprocessed feeling underneath the project, does not disappear in the conversion. It accumulates, it thickens, and across decades of this pattern, it becomes a kind of structural damage that Ford cannot see because he has been inside it too long. Stan is the counterweight. Stan also does not fit Glass Shard Beach in any conventional sense, but Stan's response to not fitting is performance rather than study. He leans into the strangeness, turns it into a persona, learns to run small cons as a child, develops a social nimbleness that is the external mirror of Ford's interior richness. Where Ford processes the world inward, through observation and document and the quiet accumulation of understanding, Stan processes it outward, through action and charm, and the improvised social performance of someone who never had the luxury of retreating into abstraction. They are, in the way that certain pairs of people are, a complete picture together and 2 incomplete pictures separately. The boat is the concrete symbol of their completeness. The Stano War, the sailing dream they develop on the beach without any clear plan for how it would actually work, is the emblem of a future where the specific combination of what they each are, together, constitutes something whole. Ford's depth and Stan's breadth, Ford's knowledge and Stan's instinct, Ford's interior and Stan's exterior. The sailing dream is not just a childhood fantasy about adventure. It is an implicit map of a life that requires both of them to be what they need to be. And its destruction, which arrives before either of them understands what it represented, is the first catastrophe in a series that will take 30 years to begin to repair. The Science Fair, Season 2, Episode 12, A Tale of Two Stans, which aired July 13, 2015, and drew 1.91 million viewers, a Disney XD record at the time of broadcast. This is the episode where the show fully reveals the backstory that has been building since the first season, the explanation for why Stan and Ford are estranged, why Ford was in the portal, why Stan has been impersonating his brother for 3 decades. It is organized as an extended flashback, Stan and Ford sitting in the present day with Dipper and Mabel, while the past is shown in full. It is almost the length of a short film, and it is one of the most morally sophisticated episodes the show produced, because it refuses to assign clean roles of villain and victim to a situation that had neither. Ford built a perpetual motion machine for a high school science fair. Not a demonstration project, not a model or a presentation, but a working machine sophisticated enough to attract the attention of recruiters from West Coast Tech. the prestigious institution that was Ford's dream school, and the goal his entire academic life had been oriented toward. West Coast Tech was not just a school to Ford. It was the concrete form of his belonging to the right category, the moment when the strangeness of Glass Shard Beach would be recognized as exactly what it was, when the 6 fingers and the excess intelligence and the years of feeling like the wrong size for his context would be validated by the most prestigious institution available. Everything rode on the machine. Stan knew this. Stan also knew, in the way you know things when someone's future is about to carry them somewhere you cannot follow, that West Coast Tech meant the sailing dream was over. That Ford going to the best school on the West Coast meant Ford leaving Glass Shard Beach and leaving Stan, and that the map of the future where they sailed away together was closing. The fear underneath that knowledge was real. The love underneath the fear was also real. The selfishness inside the love is real too, and the show is honest enough to show you all three at once. In a moment of panic and something that the show leaves deliberately ambiguous between rage and grief and fear, Stan touched the machine and it broke. The recruiters came. The machine did not work. The opportunity vanished. Ford blamed Stan for deliberate sabotage. Their father believed Ford. Stan was thrown out of the house. The outcome for Ford, measured externally, is that he misses West Coast Tech and goes to Backups instead. This is the obvious loss, and the one the show frames the scene around. But the real loss is not the school. The real loss is Stan. Stan, the one person in Ford's life who knew him before the credentials and the journals and the intellectual reputation, who shared the strangeness of Glass Shard Beach without needing to understand it, who was simply and always there, in the particular way that twins are there for each other, simultaneously another person and a kind of extension of the self. The science fair incident is experienced by Ford as an act of betrayal against his future. It is actually the destruction of his only functioning relationship, and everything Ford builds in the years that follow is built in the absence of that relationship, without Ford quite knowing that the absence is the problem. His response is the response he gives every loss. Convert it into a project. The project is succeeding anyway, going to Backups and thriving so completely that West Coast Tech becomes a footnote rather than a defining failure, making the fall a foundation. And it works, academically. Ford flourishes at Backups in ways that are genuinely admirable and, read with care, another chapter in the same ongoing pattern. Because the success at Backups does not address the wound is still there. The structure Ford is building is real and impressive, and it is built on top of an unhealed fracture, and fractures that go unaddressed tend to widen rather than close, especially when something new arrives to test them. Backups University. The show treats it with a specific register of dry humor that Hirsch is very good at, a register that conveys the consolation prize nature of the institution without requiring explicit statement. Mostly bug-free dorms, an institution of second choice, the kind of place that people in serious academic circles identify instantly without needing to be told what the hierarchy is. And Ford thrives there. He earns 12 doctorates. The Gravity Falls Wiki confirms this number. 12 separate doctoral qualifications, mostly in the sciences. The specific fields are not all cleanly confirmed in the show itself, and I am going to follow the omission rule and not construct a list from inference, but the show mentions hyper-advanced engineering, fifth-dimensional calculus, and applied quantum among the subjects Ford pursued. 12 doctorates. I want to sit with this number for a moment because it is one of the most revealing things in the entire character profile. You do not earn 12 doctorates because you need them. 1 or 2 doctorates is research qualifications. 3 or 4 is a polymathic breadth. 12 is something else. 12 is the number you earn when the process of earning them is providing something that you cannot find anywhere else. Something that functions as a substitute for the kind of meaning that other people find in relationships, community, belonging. The doctoral process gives you a question, a methodology, a community of scholars who are engaged with the same question, a clear metric of progress, and at the end, a ceremony of recognition. It gives you, in other words, a structured form of meaning that is entirely internal to the intellectual project and requires no particular other person to sustain. You always know whether you passed your dissertation defense. You do not always know whether you have maintained a friendship correctly or loved someone in the way they needed to be loved. Ford's 12 doctorates are not credentials. They are the accumulated evidence of a strategy for living that works brilliantly on its own terms and is missing something essential that Ford will not identify for another 30 years. He meets Fiddleford Hadron McGucket at Backups-Moore. They become roommates, and, in the way that certain people simply fit together in a way that bypasses the usual social friction, genuine friends. McGucket is brilliant, warm, and socially capable in ways Ford is not. He will later build a successful computer business in Palo Alto, California, which in the context of the early 1970s means he is working at the ground floor of one of the most consequential technological revolutions in human history. He laughs easily. He cares about the people around him. He is the kind of person who, in a different version of Ford's life, might have provided the model for a different kind of intelligence, serious and rigorous, without the walls. After Backups-Moore, after the 12 doctorates, Ford moves to Gravity Falls, Oregon. The show's timeline places this in the mid-1970s based on the surrounding chronology, and it is drawn there by what Ford has come to specialize in. The concentration of supernatural phenomena around the town is unlike anything he has encountered anywhere else. An anomalous density of the inexplicable, the kind of thing that would be reported and dismissed in most contexts, has been accumulating in this small Oregon town for what appears to be decades or longer. For a man who has made the study of anomaly the entire project of his existence since Glass Shard Beach, Gravity Falls is the most interesting place on Earth. He begins to write. Journal 1, Journal 2, Journal 3. 3 handwritten volumes, each marked with the 6-fingered hand symbol that has been Ford's emblem since childhood. The act of keeping them is one of the most revealing things Ford does, and the thing I come back to most often when I think about his character, because it shows you more cleanly than almost anything else what Ford believes the world is fundamentally for. He does not try to exploit what he finds. He does not try to commercialize it or expose it or use it for power or profit. His response, when he encounters the impossible, is to write it down, to turn the inexplicable into the explained, the threatening into the categorized, the chaotic into the ordered. He is documenting. He is building reliable knowledge. He is doing, in a small town in Oregon with a population that does not know what lives in its woods, the same thing that scientists have been doing for centuries, treating the universe as a system legible enough to be understood by patient attention. The journals are Ford at his most admirable, the careful empiricist, the honest recorder, the builder of reliable knowledge about a world that has not been reliably known. The cipher layer the show embeds in its own structure, across the credits and episode end cards and background art, is an extension of Ford's character into the architecture of the show itself. Alex Hirsch built Gravity Falls to hide things the way Ford hides things, to reward close reading the way Ford's journals reward close reading, to be a system of encoded meaning that patient attention can open. When fans decode the Caesar cipher message in the Season 1 credits, or work out the Visionaire message in the Season 2 episode codes, they are doing what Ford does, treating the signal as meaningful rather than arbitrary, trusting that the system rewards the effort of attention. This alignment between Ford's epistemological practice and the show's own structure is the most quietly sophisticated thing the show does, because it puts the audience in Ford's position, living inside his framework of meaning, which makes what happens next to Ford much more legible from the inside. And here is where we have to talk about Bill Cipher, because you cannot understand what happens to Ford without understanding what walks through the door when Ford reads the cave incantation. Not just what Bill does, which the show depicts clearly enough, but what Bill is, and what he represents, and where the show places him in a much longer intellectual tradition. Bill Cipher is a two-dimensional dream demon, though the word demon is maybe too small for what the show depicts. He was born, or came into being, in Euclydia, a universe of 2 spatial dimensions, as a being constrained to that flatness the way 3-dimensional beings are constrained to 3 dimensions. 2-dimensional physics, 2-dimensional experience, 2-dimensional existence. But he was born with what the show calls a strange eye, the ability to perceive beyond the dimensional boundary of his world, to see into the 3-dimensional reality on the other side of everything his universe contained. He could see, in other words, not just what was in his world, but what his world was in. He could perceive the depth that his existence had no language for. He could see what was actually there. In 1884, the mathematician and schoolmaster Edwin Abbott published a novella called Flatland, a romance of many dimensions, about a 2-dimensional square in a flat world who is visited by a sphere from the third dimension and given a terrifying, transformative glimpse of spatial reality beyond his own experience. The story is one of the most enduring thought experiments in the history of speculative fiction because its central image is so generative, a consciousness confronted with the existence of a reality it cannot conceptualize from within the constraints of its native experience. The Flatland Square is overwhelmed, destabilized, and ultimately silenced when he tries to communicate what he has seen. His world cannot receive it. Bill is the Flatland protagonist, taken to the darkest possible conclusion. He did not receive the vision of higher dimensions with the humility appropriate to a creature confronted with the enormous smallness of its own world. He did not experience it as transformation in the direction of wisdom. He experienced it as revelation in the direction of something the show frames as boredom, and the word boredom is doing enormous work in that framing. Boredom is not a dramatic emotional response. It is the deflated, anticlimactic name for the condition of a consciousness that has outgrown its container without having anywhere meaningful to go. Bill saw the full picture, or more of the full picture than any consciousness in Euclydia had ever seen, and his homeworld shrank in the light of it. The specific things that had constituted his life, whatever relationships and community and texture of everyday flat existence Euclydia contained, became arbitrary constructs against the backdrop of the greater reality he could now perceive. And so he burned it, his homeworld, his parents, his community, everything that constituted the specific, irreplaceable circumstances of his life. The show delivers this backstory matter-of-factly, and in doing so achieves something precise. It does not make the destruction dramatic, because Bill does not experience it as dramatic. From the perspective he has achieved, the perspective that nihilism requires, the destruction of Euclydia is not a crime or a tragedy. It is a logical action taken from a sufficient elevation. Nothing in Euclydia mattered, in the sense that nothing was objectively valuable from the cosmic view Bill had achieved, and so removing it was not different in kind from any other act of organization. This is nihilism as an operational fact. The conclusion that nothing matters produces the behavior that treats nothing as mattering. The nightmare realm, where Bill relocates after the destruction of Euclydia, is the physical environment that corresponds to this philosophy. It is formless. Nothing in it has stable shape. Nothing persists long enough to become a distinct thing. Bill cannot take a physical body there. He exists as pure consciousness without form, capable only of reaching into the minds of others, passing through dreams and mindscapes and shared interior spaces, which is the only mode of experience available to a consciousness that has abandoned every particular attachment and has nothing of its own to inhabit. The nightmare realm is what the nihilist destination looks like as a place. Pure abstraction, pure potential, no specific anything, just the possibility of everything and the actuality of nothing. And yet Bill is one of the great entertainers in the history of animated television. This is the part that gets me. The show's depiction of Bill is not grim or portentous or ominous in the heavy, melodramatic way that cartoon villains often are. Bill is funny, genuinely funny, with sharp timing and genuine wit, and a showmanship that is hard not to enjoy even when you know exactly what he is doing. His most quoted line from Season 1, Episode 19, Dreamscaperers, is, "Remember, reality is an illusion. The universe is a hologram. Buy gold. Buy." This is the structure of a serious nihilistic claim. Reality is an illusion. The universe is a hologram, punctuated by the abrupt bathos of practical financial advice and a cheerful goodbye. The banal deflation of the cosmic statement, the implication that the consciousness who holds these views cannot quite commit to their enormity without sliding into something ridiculous. Alex Hirsch has reportedly said, and the research brief notes this attribution is unconfirmed in a specific interview or publication, that Bill represents the fear that nothing matters. I think this is right as a description of what Bill does in the show's emotional economy, and I want to develop it a little, because the fear that nothing matters is not the same thing as the belief that nothing matters. The fear is the anxious, unsettled condition of a consciousness that suspects the nihilistic conclusion might be correct, but has not arrived there and is not sure it wants to. Bill is the externalization of that fear into a figure. He is what the conclusion looks like when a consciousness stops fearing it and starts living from it. He is cheerful because the fear is gone. The fear goes when the belief is complete. And the show is asking, is that kind of cheerfulness actually freedom, or is it the loss of something you cannot get back once it's gone? Ford, when Bill walks into his mindscape, is in the condition of someone who is vulnerable to exactly this. Bill, not because he believes nothing matters, but because he has organized his life in a way that makes the nihilistic conclusion feel almost logical. Ford has spent his adult life constructing a self that does not require other people, not aggressively, not with any explicit philosophy behind it, gradually and unconsciously, through choices that each seemed individually reasonable and that collectively built a fortress. Study hard enough and you do not have time to miss anyone. Know enough and the world holds no surprises. Achieve enough and the exclusion that started on the beach in New Jersey cannot reach you anymore. The result, by the time Bill arrives, is a person who is extraordinarily capable, genuinely productive, and isolated in a way he may not recognize as isolation, because it has been the normal condition of his adult life for long enough to feel like independence. Bill's offer is calibrated to this with a precision that is either extraordinary good luck or the result of 1 trillion years of studying what lonely, brilliant people need. Bill does not offer Ford power. He does not offer money or status or the ordinary currencies of advancement. He offers recognition. I see what you are. I chose you. I choose one brilliant mind each century to work with, and this century that mind is yours. You, Ford Pines, the strange kid from Glass Shard Beach who converted anomaly into vocation and built 12 doctorates and moved to Oregon and found things nobody else was even looking for. I chose you. The reason this works, the reason Ford does not immediately see it for what it is that it reaches something Ford has been genuinely missing. Not power, not knowledge, though knowledge is the medium in which the deal is eventually settled, but recognition, being seen. The particular experience of having someone perceive exactly what you are and value you for it rather than despite it. Glass Shard Beach did not do this. Backup S'more's doctoral process gave Ford a structured form of recognition, but not a personal one. The journals gave him something to do with the strangeness, but not someone to do it with. Bill walks in and says, "You are the specific person I was looking for." And the thing that makes this devastating as manipulation is that from Ford's side, the recognition feels real, because feelings are real when you are having them, regardless of whether the source of the feeling is genuine. The structure of what follows is the structure of a grooming relationship, and I use this term with care because the show is using it with care. The pattern is not unique to this fictional context. Isolation is the precondition. The specific shape of the need, in Ford's case, the hunger to be seen as valuable in a way that accounts for the strangeness rather than merely tolerating it, is identified and precisely addressed. Something presenting as partnership and recognition is offered, calibrated to the specific shape of the need. The less powerful party's investment grows through warmth and shared work, and the gradual establishment of dependency. And then, when the dependency is complete enough that the relationship is load-bearing, the exploitation proceeds. Bill does not rush any of this. He is patient because he has been practicing for 1 trillion years and because rushing would be inefficient. He is warm during the construction phase, because warmth is what Ford responds to. He is genuinely useful, in the sense that his guidance of the portal blueprints produces something that actually works, because a partner who cannot deliver would have been rejected by someone as rigorous as Ford. The collaboration is, from Ford's perspective, one of the most intellectually fulfilling experiences of his life, and that is the cruelest fact about it. The fulfillment was real, the intellectual excitement was real, the feeling of finally being understood by someone fast enough to keep up was real, in the way that feelings are real when you are having them, regardless of the nature of the thing producing them. What was not real was the caring underneath the partnership. Bill was not interested in Ford as a person. He was interested in the portal as a mechanism. The warmth was the cost of building the portal, paid willingly because it was the efficient approach, not because Bill has anything remotely resembling genuine regard for Ford's inner life. A Ford who felt seen and valued and finally acknowledged was a Ford who would work openly and without suspicion, who would share everything, who would dismiss his own misgivings because the relationship was the most fulfilling thing in his adult life and he did not want to lose it. Bill understood this. Ford did not understand it until it was too late. McGucket is recruited to help build the portal. He comes from Palo Alto, California, where he had established a successful computer business, because Ford calls him, and Ford is his friend, and McGucket is the kind of person who shows up when friends need him. He arrives in Gravity Falls and gets to work alongside Ford, contributing engineering expertise to a machine whose ultimate purpose he does not yet understand, and whose builder does not yet fully understand either. The first test run of the portal does not go as planned. McGucket is accidentally pulled through. He glimpses what is on the other side, what Bill actually is, what the nightmare realm actually is, and he comes back altered, changed in the way that people are changed by experiences that exceed their ability to integrate. He tells Ford, "This is wrong. Whatever is on the other side of that portal is not what we think. We have to stop. We have to stop right now." He is not ambiguous about this. He is not hedging. He is saying, with the full weight of everything he has just witnessed, that the project needs to end. Ford does not stop, and this is the moral center of everything that follows in Ford's arc, the decision that makes every subsequent catastrophe possible, the hinge on which everything turns. The refusal is not simply stubbornness, though there is stubbornness in it. It is what happens when a project has become so central to a person's sense of themselves that abandoning the project means abandoning the self, or the version of the self that the project has been sustaining. To stop on McGucket's testimony would require Ford to accept that his best judgment was badly wrong in ways he had no warning of, that the relationship he found most fulfilling was a calculated manipulation, that the meaning he had been getting from the work was founded on a lie, and it would require him to accept all of this not from his own evidence but from what is, in Ford's framework, a single data point, his friend's emotional response to an experience that cannot be replicated or measured. The science, as Ford understands it, says, one data point is insufficient to revise a hypothesis. Look for more data before you abandon the project. This is a sound methodological principle. It is also being weaponized because the thing the methodology is being applied to is aware of being studied and is controlling what Ford sees. Bill is not a passive natural phenomenon, subject to neutral observation. Bill is an active intelligence managing Ford's perception of the evidence. Ford's epistemological framework is not wrong. It is just being used against him, and he cannot see it being used against him because the framework does not have a category for the possibility that the system of meaning itself is compromised. McGucket leaves Gravity Falls. He cannot erase what he saw through the ordinary mechanism of forgetting, because what he saw is not the kind of thing that ordinary forgetting handles. The mind has mechanisms for processing and eventually setting aside uncomfortable memories. It does not have good mechanisms for processing the direct perception of a cosmic nihilistic horror. So McGucket does something that is both an act of desperation and a piece of extraordinary engineering. He builds a device capable of precisely removing specific memories from a human mind. The memory gun. He uses it on himself to remove what he saw through the portal. The memory fragments and returns in pieces. So he uses the memory gun again and again. Each use removes the target memory more completely. Each use also removes, increasingly, the connective tissue surrounding the memory, the pathways between things, the architecture of a mind that has been built across decades of accumulated experience. The gun does not know where the trauma ends and the person begins. Fiddleford Hadron McGucket, the warm and capable computer entrepreneur from Palo Alto who came to Oregon because his friend called him, becomes through repeated self-administered erasure, Old Man McGucket, the disheveled hermit of Gravity Falls, who talks to animals and collects garbage, and has almost entirely ceased to be the person he was. The mind that built a successful computer business in the 1970s, that was brilliant enough to help construct an interdimensional portal, that was warm enough to be Ford's only adult friend, has been systematically dismantled by its owner in order to stop knowing something it could not live knowing. And McGucket founds the Society of the Blind Eye. Secondary sources describe the founding as happening in 17 days, which, if accurate, is the most telling detail about what kind of person McGucket was, even in his diminished state. Someone who, even while dismantling his own mind, could still build an effective institution in 2.5 weeks. The society is dedicated to erasing the memories of anyone in Gravity Falls who witnesses the supernatural, removing knowledge before it can cause the kind of damage it caused McGucket. It is, in structure and purpose, the philosophical opposite of Ford's journals. Ford believed that everything should be documented, that knowledge is always preferable to ignorance, that understanding the universe is the highest human project. McGucket, after what he saw, built an institution dedicated to ensuring that people did not have to understand certain things, that the worst knowledge could be removed rather than lived with. The Society of the Blind Eye and the journals are antithetical philosophies made institutional, and they are both, in their different ways, responses to the same thing. The gap between what human minds can find and what human minds can hold. The journals say, document it, understand it, make it manageable through knowledge. The Society of the Blind Eye says, some things cannot be made manageable through knowledge, and for those things, the merciful response is forgetting. Neither of them is entirely right. The show will eventually prove this by having the memory gun be the tool that destroys Bill, not used to forget, but used to sacrifice. McGucket dissolves as a coherent person across years of self-administered amnesia, so that a small Oregon town can avoid the consequences of Ford's choices. This is the cost I keep coming back to when I think about Ford's arc. Not the abstract cost of the portal or the existential stakes of the nightmare realm, but the specific destruction of a specific brilliant man who came to Gravity Falls because Ford called him and trusted Ford and was not protected by that trust. McGucket is the collateral damage of Ford's isolation, the human toll of the belief that one person can manage everything alone. Ford discovers Bill's actual plan. He realizes the portal is not a window into new knowledge, but an invasion route. He shuts it down. He hides the journals. He writes what will become the most analyzed inscription in the show's run, the warning that defines his legacy and that he will eventually have to recant: trust no one. The warning is sincere. It is what he has learned. It is also wrong, and the show knows it is wrong, and the show will spend the rest of its run demonstrating exactly how wrong it is and what the wrongness costs. Trust no one is the epistemological position of a person who has been so thoroughly betrayed by a trusted relationship that they have concluded the category of trusting relationship is itself the problem, rather than the specific relationship that betrayed them. Ford generalizes from Bill to everyone. The generalization is the error, and it will cost him 30 more years of unnecessary isolation before he begins to correct it. Then Stan arrives. Stanley Pines, the overlooked twin, the con man, the one the family wrote off after the science fair incident. He has spent the years since being thrown out of the house surviving by his wits, running small-time grifts, living rough, not quite succeeding at any of the schemes he has attempted but accumulating, slowly, the particular kind of practical intelligence that comes from having nothing to fall back on and having to figure things out from first principles every time. He has found Ford. He has tracked his estranged twin to Gravity Falls, and he has come, the show makes clear, without any specific plan, because he cannot accept that his brother is simply gone from his life. The sailing dream, or the memory of it, the blueprint of a future where they were still a pair going somewhere together, has not died in him the way it appears to have died in everything Ford has built. The confrontation is not reconciliation. Ford is carrying too much. The guilt over the science fair, the awareness of what he walked into with Bill, the fragile containment of the hidden journals and the shutdown portal. Stan is not a comfort at this moment. He is another complication in a situation already beyond Ford's capacity to manage. They fight, in the physical way, the way brothers fight when decades of unprocessed grief exhaust the vocabulary of argument and become something more primal. In the course of the fight, the portal is accidentally activated. Ford is sucked through the opening before it closes. The machine breaks. Stan is left in the shack, alone, with the destroyed portal and his gone brother. The show does not give you the exact year, and I am following the research brief's guidance and not inventing one. What the show gives you instead is the consequence: 30 years of Stan alone in Gravity Falls, impersonating Ford, running the mystery shack as a tourist trap and a cover, collecting the 3 journals one by one, teaching himself enough of Ford's machine to begin the process of rebuilding it, working toward a solution he could not fully understand with tools he could barely read. For 30 years, without acknowledgement, without assistance, without any certainty that it would work. Let me be specific about what this means. Stan did not have Ford's doctorates. He did not have Ford's understanding of the physics involved. He had the journals, which were written for Ford by Ford, and were not designed as instructional materials for a con man with a limited science background. He had the machine in its broken state. He had a shop full of odd objects and a life organized around the pretense that he was someone he was not, and he spent 30 years in that life working toward one thing: bringing his brother home. This is not a philosophical choice. Stan does not have a framework, does not have a theory of meaning, or an argument about why this matters more than alternatives. He has an attachment, a specific, personal, entirely unreasonable love for one particular person, a person he has not spoken to for 30 years. a person who blamed him for the worst thing that ever happened to either of them, a person who, if you did a rigorous cost-benefit analysis of the relationship from Stan's position, has given him far more pain than benefit. And the attachment is exactly the kind of thing that nihilism identifies as the source of most human suffering. The arbitrary binding of your well-being to the existence and condition of a specific other person, who may not reciprocate, may not survive, may not be findable. Stan does not care. He does the work anyway. This is what the show is building in the background while Ford is traveling the multiverse. Not an argument, an example. Stan, who does not have a philosophy, who has never organized his life around intellectual abstraction, who could not tell you what nihilism is or explain why the question of whether anything matters is philosophically significant, is embodying the show's answer to Bill Cipher's worldview through 30 years of unglamorous daily work on a machine he barely understands, for a person who might not thank him, toward an outcome he cannot guarantee. He is doing it because he loves Ford, and that, the show insists, is sufficient. Ford walks out of the portal in Season 2, Episode 11, Not What He Seems, which aired March 9, 2015. The dramatic construction of this moment, a full season and a half of accumulated mystery resolving in a single image, a six-fingered hand reaching through the light of the reopened portal, is one of the better executed reveals in animated television. The mystery of the author, who wrote the journals, who built the machine, who lived in the shack before Stan did, is resolved. And then the harder work begins. Ford's return is not a resolution. It is the beginning of the most complicated part of his arc, the part where he has to exist in relationship with people again after 30 years of the opposite, where his paranoia and his certainty and the fortress of his isolation have to meet a family that built something real in his absence. He is not easy. He issues commands rather than requests. He operates from assumptions rather than conversations. He has spent 3 decades in environments where other people were either absent or potentially dangerous. And the habit of treating others as variables to be managed, rather than people to be known, has calcified into something that looks from the outside like arrogance, but is from the inside more like the defensive architecture of someone who has learned to survive by keeping everyone at a distance. Season 2, Episode 12, A Tale of Two Stans, is the episode where the show forces the rupture into the light. Both brothers sit with Dipper and Mabel and tell their versions of the science fair story, and the moral sophistication of the episode is that neither version is wrong, and neither is complete. Ford is not wrong that Stan broke the machine. Stan is not wrong that he did not do it deliberately, that fear rather than malice drove the moment, that the fear itself was a warped form of love. The truth is in the middle, in the space between the two versions, in the place where two people who love each other failed each other by being exactly who they were in a moment that required them to be more than that. The show does not resolve this cleanly. It just shows you both sides and asks you to hold them. Season 2, Episode 13, Dungeons, Dungeons, and More Dungeons, aired August 3, 2015. The episode where Ford and Dipper find each other through a tabletop fantasy role-playing game of extraordinary mathematical complexity. This detail is precise as character writing. Ford and Dipper are both minds that are most comfortable inside structured systems with clear rules and verifiable outcomes. They can be present with each other, warmly and genuinely present, through the medium of the game, because the game provides the scaffolding that direct emotional engagement requires, and that neither of them finds easy. The warmth is real. It is happening through abstraction, which is both charming and a portrait of two people for whom intimacy is more natural when it has an intermediary system to pass through. Ford reads Dipper's entries in Journal 3 and calls him a natural. This is the highest compliment in Ford's vocabulary. And it is also, reading carefully, a recognition of himself. Dipper has the same fundamental relationship to the strange and unexplained that Ford had as a child in Glass Shard Beach. Not fear, but fascination. Not avoidance, but the need to understand. The drive to document and know, rather than to escape. Ford looks at Dipper and sees the kid from the beach who turned strangeness into vocation. The kid he was before the science fair and the portal, and 30 years in the multiverse made him the person he is now. And he sees, for the first time in a very long time, the possibility of giving that kid something he himself never had. A teacher, a guide, a structured relationship with knowledge. The formal offer of apprenticeship in Season 2, Episode 17, Dipper and Mabel vs. the Future, aired October 12, 2015, is the most genuinely generous thing Ford does in the entire series. He asks Dipper to stay in Gravity Falls after the summer ends, to become his research partner, to continue the journals, to apprentice under the person who knows more about the supernatural world around Gravity Falls than any other living being. He is offering Dipper a home in the world Ford has inhabited his whole life. He is saying, "What makes you strange is what makes you valuable, and I will spend whatever time I have left proving it." And Dipper almost says yes. The pull is enormous and real, and the show does not pretend otherwise. Dipper has spent his whole life feeling like the wrong size for his context, too interested in things nobody else cares about, too internal, too much himself. Ford is offering him permission to be all of that and more, backed by the most credentialed and experienced teacher in the field, in the most interesting location on the planet, with the most important work available to any living person. It would be easy to say yes. The reason he says no is Mabel. He chooses his twin sister over the apprenticeship. He chooses the specific relationship over the abstraction of the great work. And the show is absolutely clear. This is right. Not because the apprenticeship was wrong. Not because Ford was mistaken to offer it, but because Dipper, 12 years old, has arrived by the end of the summer at the show's central conclusion. The connection is not what you sacrifice on the way to the important work. The connection is the important work. This is the show's most direct comment on Ford's fundamental error, and the mirror is as legible as mirrors get. Ford chose the journals over Stan. Ford chose the deal over McGucket's warning. Ford chose the project over every relationship that tried to reach him. Dipper, given the same fork in the road, turns the other way. Mabel gives the rift to Bill. The details of how this happens in episode 17 involve her own fear of the summer ending, of childhood ending, of the twins separating as they grow up, her own version of the anxiety about being left behind that once drove Stan to break a machine in a gymnasium. The mechanism is different, but the emotional structure is the same. Someone acts from love and fear in a moment they do not fully understand, and the consequence is something that cannot be undone. Weirdmageddon is, in this sense, the science fair at apocalyptic scale. Season 2, Episode 18, Weirdmageddon Part 1, XPC VEAOQ Foxo, aired late October 2015. The episode title is a cipher, one of the show's last before the cipher game ends in the finale. Bill uses the rift. The nightmare realm merges with the physical world of Gravity Falls. Reality breaks. Impossible geometries impose themselves on the landscape. The familiar geography of Gravity Falls becomes something hallucinatory and wrong. Bill manifests in physical form, enormous and bright, and genuinely, cheerfully thrilled with what he has accomplished, presiding over the ruin of everything ordinary. Ford refuses to cooperate when Bill approaches him. This refusal is principled, rooted in Ford's understanding of what Bill wants and his determination not to provide it, the equation that would complete the merging of the nightmare realm with physical reality and extend Weirdmageddon globally. Ford will not give Bill this equation. He refuses the place in the new order that Bill offers. He refuses to concede that Bill's victory is complete or inevitable. The problem with Ford's refusal, and this is the thing the show is precise about, is not that it is wrong. It is courageous and principled, and Ford is right to refuse. The problem is that it is rooted in the same assumption that produced every mistake in Ford's history, the assumption that this is ultimately about individual genius, that the threat will be resolved by Ford's knowledge and Ford's resources, that the solution belongs to the lone expert rather than to the community. Ford is trying to fight Bill the same way he has tried to fight everything in his life, alone, from a position of superior knowledge. And Bill, who does not care about superior knowledge because Bill does not play by the rules of knowledge games, simply converts Ford into a golden statue, a backscratcher, decorative and humiliated and completely neutralized. This is the show making its argument in physical terms. All of Ford's doctorates, all his journals, all his interdimensional survival, his quantum destabilizer, his decades of expertise about the supernatural world. And the result, when confronted with something that simply does not respect any of it, is a golden ornament. Not destroyed, not defeated, just made irrelevant. Bill does not need to be smarter than Ford. He does not need to out-argue Ford. He just needs to not care about the things Ford cares about, and he does not, because caring about things is the one capacity he gave up when he burned Euclydia. Season 2, Episode 19, Weirdmageddon 2, Escape from Reality, aired late November 2015, and Ford remains petrified throughout. Dipper and Wendy and Seuss search for Mabel, trapped inside a dream bubble of impossible sweetness. The show has removed its most knowledgeable character from the board and given the work to everyone else. The narrative is making an argument in structure. The community can function, the family can work, even without the genius. Not as well, not as quickly, but it can function. The genius is not the only thing that matters. The genius is not even the decisive thing. The memory gun that Bill trapped Ford into gold recalls McGucket's original use of the same mechanism. Ford watched McGucket use the memory gun to erase trauma. Now, everything Ford spent his life documenting and understanding has not protected him from ending up frozen and ornamental in the middle of the catastrophe he spent 30 years trying to prevent. Season 2, Episode 20, Weirdmageddon 3, Take Back the Falls. February 15th. The plan that defeats Bill comes from the family acting together. The key move, the trick that makes everything possible, requires everyone. Dipper and Mabel and Ford and Seuss and Wendy and Stan, functioning as a coordinated unit rather than as isolated agents, each doing the part that they specifically are able to do. The switch, the moment when Bill is tricked into entering Stan's mind instead of Ford's, requires Stan to be ready and Ford to signal and everyone else to hold the space. It is not a plan that genius produces alone. It is a plan that family executes together. And then Stan allows the memory gun to be fired at him. His mind is erased. 30 years of impersonating Ford, of running the Mystery Shack, of loving his niece and nephew through 2 summers, of the daily texture of a life that was strange and improvised and deeply felt, all of it goes dark. Bill, trapped inside a dissolving consciousness, is dissolved alongside it. The nihilist who made his home in other people's minds, who had been living inside borrowed interior spaces since he burned his own homeworld, is unmade by the erasure of the one mind he thought was safe enough to enter. The memory gun closes a loop that the show opened with McGucket, and the loop is moral as well as structural. McGucket used the memory gun to escape from the consequences of Ford's choices, to remove knowledge he could not live with, to build institutional forgetting as a response to cosmic horror. Stan uses the same device not to escape but to arrive, not to remove knowledge but to remove himself, not to preserve ordinary life but to end something that had to be ended. Where McGucket's use was flight, Stan's is the most complete act of presence the show depicts. He is fully there, fully himself, knowing exactly what he is giving up, and he gives it up without hesitation. Stan's willingness to pay this cost is the show's answer to Bill Cipher. Not a philosophical answer, not a logical refutation of the position that nothing matters, not an argument that could defeat nihilism on its own terms, because nihilism, held consistently, cannot be defeated on its own terms. If nothing matters, then the refutation does not matter either. The show's answer is not argumentative, it is exemplary. Stan does something. He makes a specific choice in a specific moment, in full awareness of what it costs, for a specific other person. The reasoning, if you tried to reconstruct it formally, would not survive the scrutiny of someone genuinely committed to the position that nothing has objective value. But the choice does not need to survive that scrutiny. The choice is made from love, not from logic. And love is precisely the thing that nihilism's framework cannot account for, because love is the arbitrary attachment to particular things that the cosmic perspective identifies as the source of all suffering. Stan chooses to be vulnerable to that suffering, rather than to be free of it. Stan chooses Ford. Ford holds his brother while Stan's memories fade. Ford, who spent 30 years writing Trust No One, who built his whole post-portal psychology on the conviction that isolation was the sound epistemological position, stands in the portal room, holding his brother, while his brother's history erases itself. The show takes this seriously. It gives you several minutes of Stan without his memories, Stan as a stranger, Stan as the evidence of what has been permanently given up, before allowing the gradual return to begin. Dipper and Mabel have prepared memory triggers, a collection of images and objects and moments designed to invoke the connections back into consciousness. The memories return, imperfectly, gradually, not completely, but enough. Stan is Stan again, mostly. The show does not punish you with permanent loss, but it makes you stay with the possibility of permanent loss long enough to understand the weight of what was paid. The argument the show makes through this moment is not that sacrifice is always repaid or that love always prevails in the cosmic sense. The argument is smaller and more honest than that. The argument is that this specific love, between these specific brothers, was worth the cost, in the only way that worth gets demonstrated, by someone being willing to pay it. Stan does not know it will work. He cannot know. He erases himself anyway. And the show says, yes, that is the thing. That is what Bill cannot do, and what Ford nearly forgot how to value, and what Dipper chose when he turned down the apprenticeship. That is the answer, not a proof, an act. One of the things that makes Ford such an interesting figure to watch in the season 2 episodes after his return is that the show keeps putting him in situations where the version of himself he has become, the paranoid multiverse survivalist with 30 years of reinforced isolation behind him, has to encounter the version of himself he might have been if things had gone differently. That alternate version is Dipper, and the encounter between them is not just a mentorship dynamic. It is Ford being confronted with the living proof that the Glass Shard Beach childhood did not have to end the way it did, that a kid with the same basic shape of personality can arrive at a different outcome if the conditions are even slightly more supportive. Dipper is not isolated in the way Ford was. He has Mabel. He has Seuss and Wendy, and the social world of Gravity Falls, however awkward his navigation of it is. He has people who are genuinely glad to see him, who want him present even when his fixations make him difficult company. The structure of Dipper's summer is not the same as Ford's childhood, and what is different is that Dipper's strangeness is received by people who find it charming rather than alien. Mabel finds Dipper's intensity endearing. This is not trivial. The experience of having your particular strangeness received well, even once, by even one person who genuinely sees it and is glad it exists, is different in kind from the experience of being perpetually the one who needs to be managed. Ford never had this consistently. He had Stan, who loved him without fully understanding him, and who eventually let fear damage what they had. He had McGucket briefly, before McGucket paid the price for Ford's choices. He had Bill, who understood him perfectly and used that understanding against him. And now he has Dipper, who understands him well enough to recognize him, and who is also, unlike Bill, genuinely glad Ford exists as a person rather than as a resource. The apprenticeship offer is Ford, from the position of someone who spent his adult life without this, trying to give Dipper the thing that Dipper's summer has already begun to provide, the experience of being the right size for your context. The fact that Dipper turns the apprenticeship down is important not just as a plot point, but as something Ford witnesses. When Dipper says no because of Mabel, he is showing Ford what the other choice looks like. He is making visible the fork in the road that Ford encountered after the science fair and took in the direction of isolation, and he is taking the other direction without ambivalence. This is not a lecture. Dipper does not say, "You made the wrong choice and I am making the right one." He just makes it, and Ford watches. And the watching is Ford's education in what the alternative looks like when someone actually lives it. Ford as a golden statue, which is where he ends up after refusing to cooperate with Bill in Weirdmageddon, is the show's funniest and most precise depiction of what the lone genius posture costs when it meets something that simply does not respect expertise. All of his knowledge, all his years of multiverse survival, everything he brought back from 30 years between dimensions, and the outcome is decorative. He is beautiful and irrelevant. He has the appearance of significance without the capacity for action, which is a kind of portrait of what isolated expertise produces when it encounters something that bypasses the framework of expertise entirely. Bill does not need to defeat Ford intellectually. He only needs to freeze Ford and move on. The intellectual architecture Ford has spent his entire life constructing has no defense against something that does not care about architecture. The unfreezing, when it comes, is not a triumph of individual knowledge. It is a consequence of the family working together in a way that creates an opening Ford alone could not have made. Ford participates in the final plan, but he does not author it. He is one contributor among several, which is a position he has never been comfortable in, and which the show is now requiring him to occupy. He does occupy it. He takes the role available to him, contributes what he specifically can contribute, and trusts the people around him to do the rest. It is, for Stanford Pines, a genuinely radical act. The Stan War 2 is the most concrete expression of what comes after. The boat represents motion without a research objective. Ford has spent his whole adult life staying in place and studying, or being involuntarily elsewhere and studying. The boat is going somewhere with someone, because you want to go somewhere with that someone, which is a different mode of being in the world from anything Ford has practiced for 30 years. The boat is not where knowledge lives. The boat is where Stan is. And that is, finally, enough to organize a life around. The show ends with the ocean, which is the right image because the ocean is large enough to absorb the weight of everything the show has been asking. It does not answer the nihilism question in philosophical terms. It does not argue that meaning exists or that the universe is structured to reward human connection. It simply puts two brothers on the water and says, "Here, this," and trusts you to feel what it is worth. If you can feel what it is worth, the nihilistic position has failed, not because it has been refuted, but because it cannot account for this feeling. And a position that cannot account for the most important feelings a person has is a position that has failed at the only test that matters. The show ended February 15th, 2016. The story did not. 6 months after the finale, on July 20th, 2016, Alex Hirsch launched the Cipher Hunt, an international alternate reality game with global scope. The first clue was left in St. Petersburg, Russia. Subsequent clues appeared across Japan and across the United States, leading the fandom across time zones and languages toward a destination they did not yet know. The final location was Reedsport, Oregon, where the Bill Cipher statue, built from plexiglass by prop master Fawn Davis and aged naturally with moss seeds rubbed into the surface, had been placed. Hirsch designed the hunt expecting it to take months. The fandom found the statue on August 2, 2016, roughly 2 weeks after the first clue went live. The winner received the title of Mayor of Gravity Falls and a sash. 2 weeks. For an international puzzle distributed across 3 countries, the speed is, to me, one of the most revealing facts about the audience Gravity Falls built. These are people who, when given the chance to collectively decode a real-world mystery, coordinated internationally, and solved it in a fortnight. The cipher layer of the show was not just a clever production feature. It trained its audience over 4 years to read closely, to trust that close reading would be repaid, to treat every detail as potentially meaningful. The Cipher Hunt was the final expression of that training, and the audience passed the test with time to spare. Gravity Falls, Journal 3, was published July 26, 2016, co-written by Alex Hirsch and Rob Renzetti, and reached the New York Times bestseller list that year. The physical object is itself a character portrait, a reproduction of Ford's third journal expanded, with material that could not fit into 40 episodes of television. It includes entries from Ford's multiverse years, additional documentation of the supernatural world around Gravity Falls, and more texture on the relationship between Ford and Bill during the years of the portal's construction. The special Blacklight edition, released June 13, 2017, in a limited run of 10,000 copies, contains content visible only under ultraviolet light. The hiding of information in a format that requires special equipment to access is, as a design choice, entirely consistent with Ford's character, and entirely consistent with the show's approach to its audience. The information is there for those who know to look. The Gravity Falls Lost Legends was published July 24, 2018, and reached the New York Times bestseller list the following month. It is a graphic novel collecting 4 stories, including one about young Stan and Ford hunting the Jersey Devil in their Glass Shard Beach years, before the science fair ended what they had. This story, more than anything else in the extended canon, shows you the warmth of the original, what Stan and Ford were to each other before the catastrophe, the specific texture of their brotherhood in the time before it broke. It is painful in the way that portraits of things before they were ruined are always painful, but it is also what makes the finale's reconciliation feel earned rather than convenient, because Lost Legends gives you something worth recovering. The Book of Bill, published July 23, 2024, 8 years after the series finale, is the most recent and perhaps most ambitious extension of the world. Written by Alex Hirsch, from Bill's perspective, it reached the New York Times bestseller list in July 2024 and remained there into January 2025. That a character perspective companion novel can debut on the bestseller list 8 years after its subject program ended says something important. The audience that grew up with Gravity Falls has grown up, and they are still working through the questions the show raised. The Book of Bill deepens rather than simplifies Bill's nihilism, giving it a history and a process rather than presenting it as a given, which is what serious storytelling does with its antagonists. It shows you how the nothing got there. There is something worth sitting with about what kind of story Ford's arc actually is, structurally, at the level of narrative form, because it is not a conventional hero's journey, and it is not quite a tragedy in the classical sense either. Ford does not begin as a hero and fall. He begins as someone who made a series of individually defensible choices that compounded over decades into catastrophe. He is not corrupted from without, not poisoned by an external force that turns a good person bad. He is eroded from within, by the same qualities that made him extraordinary, by the intelligence and rigor and relentless curiosity that the show clearly admires. The things that make Ford admirable are the things that make him vulnerable. His virtues are his weaknesses. This is the structure of a very particular kind of tragedy, the tragedy of a person who is destroyed not by their failings but by their gifts, applied without wisdom. The show is unusually honest about this, and I think it is one of the reasons the character has lasted so well in the cultural memory of the people who grew up with it. Ford is not a warning against being smart. He is a warning against letting intelligence become a substitute for the kinds of things that intelligence cannot provide. You can be the most knowledgeable person in the room and still be missing something essential. You can document every supernatural creature in Oregon and still be lonely in a way that 12 doctorates will not fix. You can decode every cipher and still not understand the person in the next room. This is not a limitation of intelligence. It is a limitation of using intelligence as a defensive formation rather than as a tool for genuine engagement with the world. The journals are the clearest expression of this tension. They are, simultaneously, the best thing Ford ever did and the emblem of the problem. They are the best thing because they are genuine, rigorous, honest documentation of a world that nobody else was looking at closely enough to see. They are the emblem of the problem because they are the mode Ford defaults to whenever his life asks him to respond emotionally. When he cannot process the feeling, he documents it instead. The journals are not just research. They are the habit of a mind that has learned to transmute personal experience into intellectual material, to make the scary or confusing or painful into something legible and organized and at a safe distance. Every journal entry is an act of understanding. It is also, in a way Ford never fully acknowledges, an act of deflection. There is a version of Ford's story that I think about sometimes, the version where the journals serve a different function, where Ford writes in them not just to document but to communicate, to leave something that he hopes someone will read, to build a record not just of what he found, but of what it felt like to find it. The show gives you glimpses of this, particularly in Journal 3, where Ford's entries have an intimacy to them that the purely scientific register cannot account for. He is not just cataloging anomalies, he is trying to share something. He is trying to be understood. The journals, read this way, are Ford's most sustained attempt at connection, addressed to a reader he cannot name because he does not know who will find them, because he cannot bring himself to address them to any specific person. Dipper finds them, and this is, the show implies, the correct outcome. Not because Dipper is simply the right person to receive the knowledge, though he is, but because Dipper is the person who will add his own entries, who will make the journals a dialogue rather than a monologue, who will turn Ford's record of isolation into the foundation of a collaborative understanding. When Ford reads Dipper's editions and calls him a natural, he is reading the first response he has ever gotten to the journals. He is seeing someone else's handwriting in the margins of the document he spent decades writing into the dark. This is what the show does when it is working at its best. It makes the emotional content inseparable from the intellectual content, so that you cannot disentangle what the journals mean as research documents from what they mean as the record of a lonely person trying to be understood. Ford built them as a scientific archive. They became a letter that eventually found its recipient. And that accident, the fact that the journals reached Dipper, is what starts the repair. There is another character in this story who does not get enough credit for the role she plays in the show's philosophical argument, and I want to give her that credit here. Mabel Pines is the twin. She is 12 years old and she knits sweaters with cats on them, and she collects sticker books, and she falls in love approximately once per episode with varying degrees of sincerity, and she is, often, read as the simpler of the two main characters, the comic relief sibling to Dipper's serious mystery solving. This reading misses what the show is doing with her almost entirely. Mabel is the show's argument made visible, not a character who arrives at the argument through experience and reflection, the way Dipper does, and not a character who embodies the argument's failure, the way Ford does. Mabel is the argument, living in it from the start, without needing to reason her way there. She is the person who is never confused about what matters. She never has to choose between the apprenticeship and the relationship, because for Mabel, the question is not a question. Connection is not the conclusion she reaches. Connection is the premise she starts from and never abandons. The show is careful not to make this simple. Mabel makes real mistakes, including the one that causes Weirdmageddon, and her mistakes come from the same place as her virtues. She loves intensely, she fears loss intensely, and when she acts from that fear, she can cause harm. The show is not saying that Mabel's way of being in the world is without cost. It is saying that the cost of her way of being in the world is different from the cost of Ford's, and that the difference matters. Ford's costs are 30 years in the multiverse, and the psychological destruction of his best friend and the near end of the world. Mabel's costs are the mistakes that come from caring too much about the wrong things at the wrong moment. Mabel's costs are human scale. Ford's costs are cosmic. This is not an accident of plot. The show is making a structural argument through the contrast. When you organize your life around connection, the things that go wrong are the things that always go wrong when people love each other, which is to say they are painful and personal and recoverable. When you organize your life around knowledge to the exclusion of connection, the things that go wrong are the things that happen when you make a deal with something that has no interest in your well-being, which is to say they are catastrophic and slow and very nearly permanent. The show loves Mabel, not in a sentimental way that ignores her flaws, in the way that good storytelling loves characters who carry the thesis with full clarity about what she costs and what she offers, and with the judgment, expressed through structure rather than through explicit statement, that what she offers is indispensable. Mabel is the reason the show can end with a boat rather than a crater. Ford is in his mid-60s during the events of the show. The show does not state his age explicitly, and I am not going to calculate one from the timeline, but the visual design and the surrounding context place him somewhere in that range. This is worth noting for what it means about the experience of watching his arc. He and Stan are the same age. They lost 30 years. They are old men reconciling a rupture that happened when they were young men, working backward through the decades to find the relationship they had before the science fair and before the portal, to build on whatever is left of what they were when they were the two kids on the beach in New Jersey with the sailing dream and the whole future undecided. This is not the story of a young person making mistakes and having time to correct them. This is the story of two people who lost the middle third of their lives to a misunderstanding and a fight and the accumulated consequences of not resolving things when they still could. The show treats this with seriousness. It does not pretend that 30 years lost is easily recovered, or that the reconciliation is complete, or that the history is erased by the finale's warmth. Ford and Stan are not the same people they would have been if the portal had never activated. They are older and more damaged and more careful than those people. The warmth of the finale is real, but it is the warmth of something being reclaimed rather than the warmth of something never lost. There is a difference, and Gravity Falls knows the difference and renders it with enough honesty that the audience feels it. What this means for the show's engagement with nihilism is that the response to nihilism the show offers is not a young person's response. It is not the response of someone who has not yet paid the cost of their choices. Ford's return to connection is the return of a person who has tried the alternative for 30 years and found it insufficient. Not as a theoretical position, but as a lived experience. He does not choose Stan over isolation because he has figured out that connection is philosophically superior. He chooses Stan because 30 years of its absence has been a kind of ongoing proof that its absence is insufficient. And he is finally in a position, and so is Stan, to do something about that. The show also has something to say about the specific experience of aging and what happens when the things you were afraid of losing turn out to have survived anyway. Stan feared that Ford going to West Coast Tech would end the sailing dream, and what the science fair incident actually did was create the conditions for a 30-year delay in the same ending he feared. The dream did not end when the machine broke. It just went underground for 30 years, sustained by the least likely person in the family, and emerged at the other end still viable, still wanted. The thing Stan tried to prevent happened anyway, in a different form, and the thing he destroyed himself trying to prevent turned out to be survivable. These are not tidy lessons, but they are true ones. There is something I keep coming back to about the Cipher layer of Gravity Falls and what it means for the show's relationship with its audience. The ciphers are not just a clever feature or a piece of production design. They are a philosophical stance the show takes about what kind of relationship it wants to have with the people watching it. Most children's entertainment treats its audience as receivers. Stories are delivered, meaning is made available. The audience's job is to receive what is offered. Gravity Falls treats its audience as participants. The ciphers are there to be decoded. The hidden details in the background art are there to be found. The journals contain information that clarifies and sometimes contradicts what the episodes show. The show is telling its audience, your attention matters. The effort of close reading is repaid. The system rewards engagement. This is Ford's epistemological practice translated into an audience relationship. Ford believes that the universe is legible, that patient attention reveals meaning that is really there, rather than projecting meaning onto a blank surface. The show treats its audience the same way Ford treats the supernatural world of Gravity Falls, as a system that contains hidden truth accessible to anyone willing to look carefully enough. When fans coordinate on forums to decode the Atbash message in a Season 1 end card, they are practicing Ford's method. They are doing what he does, in a collective form, building understanding through communal close reading. This has consequences for what kind of community the show built. The fans who engaged with the cipher layer were not consuming the show passively. They were working with it, in the way that researchers work with primary sources. They were developing, through the practice of decoding, a relationship with the material that is genuinely different from the relationship a viewer has with a show that simply presents its meaning directly. And when the show ended and the cipher hunt began, those same fans had the skills and the community infrastructure to solve an international puzzle in 2 weeks, because they had been practicing exactly that kind of coordinated close reading for 4 years. The cipher layer is, in this sense, Ford's legacy in the most direct possible way. He encoded his journals. The show encoded its credits. The fans learned to decode. And when Alex Hirsch placed a triangle in a small town in Oregon and started leaving breadcrumbs across 3 countries, the community that had grown up with Ford's epistemology was ready to follow them. Let me talk about what the 30 years in the multiverse actually does to a person, because I think this period of Ford's life is underrepresented in most discussions of the character, perhaps because so little of it is shown directly. 30 years is an enormous stretch of time. It is longer than the entire lifespan of some people. It is the distance between Ford falling into the portal as a man in his early 30s and stepping out the other side as a man in his early 60s, which means that Ford did not just lose 30 years in abstract terms. He aged through them. He became old in the multiverse. He lived through whatever passes for middle age in the space between dimensions, and he did it alone. The quantum destabilizer is the artifact from this period that the show foregrounds, and it is a revealing one. Ford spent 30 years building a weapon, not a way home, not a communication device, not a message to Stan or Dipper or anyone in Gravity Falls. A weapon to fight Bill. The priority of the weapon over everything else is a choice, and it is a choice that tells you exactly what the multiverse years did to Ford's psychology. The 30 years did not produce a Ford who was ready to trust people. They produced a Ford who was ready to fight. The paranoia the show describes him as arriving with, borderline insane with paranoia, according to the research material, is the output of 3 decades of survival in conditions where every new dimension might contain new threats, and where Bill's reach, the possibility that Bill could enter Ford's mind if Ford let his guard down, was always present. There is something deeply lonely about the image of Ford in the multiverse, building a weapon in dimension after dimension, acquiring skills and knowledge and physical resilience, encountering beings like the Oracle Jesselbrom, but never quite staying anywhere long enough to belong. He is the ultimate tourist of the multiverse, moving through worlds without becoming part of them, studying and documenting and surviving, but never settling. This is not much different from how Ford was living before the portal, actually, except that the multiverse makes the isolation impossible to ignore, because there is genuinely no one there to ignore it with. The Trust No One inscription in Journal 3 is the crystallized product of these 30 years. It is not primarily a statement about Bill, though it is prompted by Bill. It is a statement about the epistemological position Ford arrived at after 3 decades of survival in conditions of maximal uncertainty and minimal human contact. Do not trust. This is the instruction of a person who has learned that trust is a vulnerability, that the moments where he let his guard down were the moments where bad things happened, that the only reliable safety is the kind you maintain alone. Ford has operationalized his wound into a philosophy, and written the philosophy down as advice and hidden it in a journal for someone to find. The tragedy of Trust No One is not that it is wrong as advice from a person in Ford's specific situation. It is probably good advice for someone who has just discovered that a trillion-year-old nihilistic dream demon has been living in their mindscape and planning an interdimensional invasion. The tragedy is that Ford applies it beyond the specific situation. He generalizes from Bill to everyone. He takes the lesson of a single catastrophic betrayal and makes it a universal principle, inscribing it in a book he leaves for a reader he does not know, whose situation may be entirely different, who may be someone who needs connection rather than isolation, who may be the person who will eventually prove that trust no one was the single most self-defeating thing Ford ever wrote. Dipper finds the journal. Dipper trusts people, specifically Mabel and his summer friends, and that trust is what makes everything work. The show makes this visible without announcing it. Ford's instruction and the outcome of the story it produces are placed in direct contrast. Ford said trust no one, and the show's events demonstrate that trusting the right people was the thing that saved everyone. Ford eventually acknowledges this. He eventually admits that wider trust, distributed trust, would have defeated Bill sooner. The inscription in Journal 3 is one of the things Ford has to take back. I want to return to Bill Cipher for a moment, because I do not think I have quite done justice to what makes him such a specific and well-designed villain in the context of the show's philosophical argument. Bill is not just the nihilist in opposition to the show's pro-connection thesis. He is the nihilist in the mode that is most seductive to people like Ford, which is the mode of intellectual superiority. Bill presents nihilism not as despair or resignation, but as clarity, as having arrived, through superior understanding of the universe's true nature, at a perspective that ordinary humans are too limited to achieve. He does not mope about the meaninglessness of existence. He celebrates it. He throws parties. He is endlessly theatrical and enormously fun. His nihilism is the nihilism of the person who has seen through the illusion and finds the seeing through liberating rather than devastating, who experiences the absence of meaning not as a loss, but as a freedom from the tedious constraints that meaning imposes on lesser minds. This is the version of nihilism that is most appealing to a certain kind of brilliant, isolated person, because it converts the experience of not fitting in, of being too far outside the ordinary community to fully belong, from a source of pain into a mark of distinction. You do not fit because you have seen further than the people around you. You are excluded because you are operating at a level they cannot reach. Your isolation is not a wound. It is the cost of your superiority. Bill offers Ford the frame that makes the wound feel like a feature, and Ford, who has been half-constructing this frame himself since Glass Shard Beach, is ready to receive it. This is also, I think, the most insidious form of nihilism's appeal, more dangerous than the version that presents itself as despair, because it is harder to identify from the inside. Despair is recognizable. It hurts. It is unambiguously bad to feel. But the intellectual version of nihilism, the version that arrives wearing the costume of superior perspective and cosmic clarity, does not feel like a problem from inside it. It feels like having figured something out. It feels like arriving. And this is why Ford cannot see what Bill is doing to him for so long, because the frame Bill is offering is not uncomfortable. It is validating. The show's deepest move, in depicting the relationship between Bill and Ford, is to show you how the validating frame and the exploitative intent are not separable. Bill is not pretending to validate Ford in order to exploit him. The validation serves the exploitation. The exploitation requires the validation. They are the same gesture from different perspectives. Bill looks at Ford and sees a resource. Ford looks at Bill and sees the recognition he has been waiting for his entire life. Both of them are seeing accurately. What Ford cannot see is that these two visions are compatible, that a resource can feel recognized without being valued, that the most thorough exploitation is the kind that makes you feel chosen. After Ford returns from the portal, the show has several episodes of adjustment in which Ford has to work out who he is in relationship to a family that has changed while he was gone. One of the most revealing scenes in this period, which happens across a few episodes rather than in a single discrete moment, is Ford's relationship to Stan's impersonation of him for 30 years. Ford's response to learning that Stan has been living as him, wearing his name and running his home and impersonating his credentials, is not straightforward gratitude. It is complicated by the history between them, by the science fair, by the 30 years of estrangement, by the fact that Ford's first instinct is still to reassert control rather than to acknowledge what Stan did. This is one of the things I admire most about the show's portrayal of Ford. It does not let him be simply grateful, does not allow the 30-year gap to resolve cleanly into warm reunion. Ford is difficult after his return, because Ford is difficult. The 30 years did not smooth him out. The multiverse did not make him a better person in the sense of being easier to love. It made him sharper, more paranoid, more certain of his own judgment, and less willing to distribute trust, more like the extreme version of the qualities he started with, rather than a corrected version. The show is honest about this. It does not require Ford to have learned the lesson of the portal in order to merit the finale's warmth. He gets the finale because of what Stan does, not because of what Ford has earned. And this, I think, is the show's most genuinely non-sentimental move. Ford's redemption is not primarily his own work. He does not do the inner work, the examination of his choices and the decision to be different, in any satisfying, cathartic arc of self-realization. He gets another chance not because he has changed enough to deserve it, but because Stan loves him enough to give it. The grace is external. It comes from outside Ford, from the unreasonable, persistent love of someone who has every reason to have given up. This is the show saying something that children's programming rarely says, that people do not always earn their second chances. Sometimes the second chance arrives because someone who loves you gives it to them regardless. Ford's response to this, the slow recognition across the final episodes that his brother spent 30 years doing the impossible for him, is the closest the show gets to genuine emotional breakthrough for Ford. Not a scene of catharsis, just the accumulation of evidence, the weight of 30 years of effort that Ford had no part in, and the arrival of something that might be called humility, or might be called the first real experience of being loved without having earned it. Now I want to think about what it means that the show aired when it did, from 2012 to 2016, and what it was encountering in the cultural moment. These were years when children's animation was in the middle of what people in the industry call a second renaissance, a period when programs like Adventure Time and Steven Universe and Regular Show and Gravity Falls itself were collectively redefining what a cartoon aimed at young people could do. They were, almost without exception, programs willing to trust their young audiences with real emotional and philosophical complexity. Programs that did not simplify their content to a level they assumed children could handle, but instead built up to things they believed children were capable of meeting. Gravity Falls is the most philosophically serious of this generation, in the sense of engaging most directly with identifiable philosophical questions rather than encoding them only in emotional terms. The questions the show asks about meaning and knowledge and the cost of isolation are questions that have been argued formally in philosophy for centuries, and the show knows this, which is why Bill Cipher's backstory is modeled on Flatland, and why Ford's arc maps so cleanly onto the tradition of the isolated intellectual in Western literature. This is a show that has done its reading. But the show also knows that having done your reading is not sufficient. It knows that a show which merely dramatizes philosophical positions is an argument, and arguments can be ignored or disputed, and what the show wants is something that cannot be argued away. What it wants is feeling. It wants you to feel the weight of 30 years lost. It wants you to feel the wrongness of a person who was supposed to trust you, treating your testimony as insufficient data. It wants you to feel the specific, unbearable sadness of watching someone erase themselves for you. The philosophical content is the skeleton. The feeling is the thing. The show's 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, across both seasons, suggests that both halves of this worked. The critics saw the philosophical ambition. The audience felt the emotional weight. The children who watched it during its original run, and are now adults who buy books about it 8 years later, were reached in both registers simultaneously, which is the condition required for a work of this kind to last. You need the skeleton and the flesh. The skeleton without the flesh is a lecture. The flesh without the skeleton is sentiment. Gravity Falls has both, and that is why it is still worth making a 2-hour essay about in 2026, a decade after the finale. What about Weirdmageddon as a visual and narrative event, separate from its philosophical function? Because the show does not just argue for its conclusions in the abstract. It renders them in images, and the images of Weirdmageddon are the show's most explicit depiction of what nihilism as a lived reality actually looks like. Bill's Weirdmageddon is not dark and oppressive in the way that fictional apocalypses usually are. It is strange and vivid and, in a disturbing way, almost festive. The sky is wrong. Gravity is inconsistent. People have been turned into tapestries or frozen in impossible positions or reorganized into pyramidal structures. Bill presides over it with genuine delight, which is the most frightening thing about the imagery. The delight is sincere. Bill is not performing satisfaction. He has what he has been working toward for longer than human civilization has existed, and his response to having it is the response of a consciousness that has no framework for using it beyond the immediate pleasure of the having. He throws a party in the middle of the apocalypse. It is, in its way, the most precise depiction of nihilism's practical consequences the show offers. The universe is unmade, and the response of the consciousness that unmade it is to have a party, because nothing else occurs to it, because it has spent 1 trillion years abandoning everything that would give the moment significance beyond the moment itself. The geography of Weirdmageddon is also significant. Bill has restructured Gravity Falls to conform to his aesthetics, which are the aesthetics of pure chaos, of nothing stable, of form without function. The town that Dipper and Mabel and Stan and Seuss and Wendy spent a summer learning to navigate has become something unnavigable, and the specific effect of this on the characters who know the town is to strip them of the accumulated competence that made them effective. Their knowledge of the normal Gravity Falls is useless in the Weirdmageddon version. They have to start from scratch. This is the show rendering Ford's predicament in spatial terms. The framework of understanding that you have spent your life building can be made irrelevant by something that simply refuses to conform to any framework. The human pyramid that Bill constructs from the townspeople of Gravity Falls is one of the more disturbing images in the show for similar reasons. The townspeople have been turned into components of a structure that serves no purpose they chose and has no relationship to anything they valued. They exist, in Bill's Weirdmageddon, as material, not as people. This is the nihilistic position applied at the collective level. If nothing matters, then the people of Gravity Falls are no different from the rocks and trees and infrastructure around them, all of them just stuff to be arranged according to the aesthetic preferences of a consciousness with the power to arrange it. The antidote to this, the thing that works where the pyramid does not, is the family. The show is very specific about the word family and about who counts as family by the end. Stan's employees, Seuss and Wendy, have become family in the functional sense. The townspeople who mobilize to take back the falls are neighbors who have become something closer. The structure of the resistance is human rather than hierarchical, organized around specific relationships rather than formal chains of command. This is not a coincidence. Bill's structure is arbitrary and top-down and based on power. The structure that defeats him is specific and lateral and based on love. I want to be precise about what Stan's sacrifice means in the show's moral economy, because it is easy to describe it as a selfless act and move on, and the show is asking for more attention than that. Stan's sacrifice is not just selfless in the general sense of prioritizing another's welfare over your own. It is the specific sacrifice of the things Stan has spent 30 years building, which is to say, it is the sacrifice of everything that has made his life meaningful during the period of his brother's absence. Think about what Stan's memories contain at the moment the memory gun is fired. 30 years of running the Mystery Shack. Every con, every tourist, every weird summer night in a small Oregon town. 2 summers with Dipper and Mabel, who brought into the shack something Stan had not had since Ford left, which is the experience of being responsible for someone he loves. The relationship with Seuss, who grew up partly in the shack and who Stan has watched grow from a kid to a young adult. The relationship with Wendy and her family. The slow reconstruction of the portal, the daily work of teaching himself enough of Ford's physics to keep going, the decades of effort that were the most sustained and purposeful things Stan had ever done. The specific texture of a life that was improvised and strange and deeply felt. All of this is what Stan gives up. He gives it up not because the sacrifice is obviously worth it, not because the calculation comes out in favor of self-erasure, but because Ford is there, and Bill is using Ford, and Stan cannot stand by while that happens. The reasoning, if you tried to formalize it, would not satisfy a philosopher committed to rational self-interest. But the reasoning is not the point. The point is the action. The action is the answer. And the answer is this. Love is not a calculation. Love is what you do when the calculation has stopped mattering, and the specific person in front of you is the only thing in the frame. Bill cannot make this choice. Physiologically, cosmically, he is incapable of it. To make Stan's choice, you would need to have something worth sacrificing, something you care about that can be given up, a specific life with specific attachments that mean enough to be worth the cost of their loss. Bill burned all of that in Euclydia, 1 trillion years ago, and has been formless ever since. He has nothing to sacrifice. He is incapable of the move that defeats him. And the show is saying, this is not Bill's strength. This is his terminal limitation. The consciousness that burned its homeworld to achieve freedom from attachment can now enter any mind it chooses and cannot be touched and cannot be stopped by conventional means, and will live until the heat death of the universe. But it cannot love anyone. It cannot give anything up. It cannot be Stan, standing in the portal room, agreeing to lose everything so that his brother does not have to. That is what Bill gave up when he burned Euclydia. Not suffering, not the vulnerability of love. He gave up the capacity to be the kind of thing that other things matter to. The Stan War II, the boat. The final image of the show, not quite the very last frame but the emotional endpoint of the series. Ford and Stan on the water together, sailing away, the childhood dream improbably fulfilled after 30 years, and a family history that should have made it impossible. I want to give this image the attention it deserves, because it is doing more work than it appears to. The sailing dream was formed before the science fair, before the rupture, before every catastrophe that followed. It was the dream of two specific boys in a specific moment, before they became the people the series depicts, before they had the histories that made them who they are. The Stan War II is not an attempt to return to that original moment. It cannot be, because the people aboard it are not those boys. They are old men, damaged and reconstituted, and marked by everything that happened in between. The boat is not a restoration of what was lost. It is the assertion that what was lost can be succeeded by something that honors it without pretending to be it. This is, I think, the most truthful thing the show says about reconciliation and time and the possibility of repair. You cannot go back. The 30 years happened. The portal happened, the science fair happened, McGucket happened, Bill happened. The show does not ask you to pretend otherwise, does not offer the fantasy of a reset, does not give Ford and Stan a moment where all of that is erased and replaced by warmth. It gives them a boat. It gives them the ocean. It gives them a future that takes the past into account rather than canceling it. And it suggests that this, the imperfect forward motion of two damaged people choosing to try again, is enough. Not a triumph, not a vindication, just enough to go on. The nihilistic position, articulated as a response to the image of the Stan War II, would be that it is too little, too late, that 30 years cannot be recovered by a boat, that the universe's indifference to the Pines brothers' reconciliation makes the reconciliation cosmically insignificant. The show's response to this position is not an argument. It is the image itself. Two brothers on a boat, the ocean ahead of them, and each other. The show presents the image and trusts you to feel what it is worth. If you can feel what it is worth, the nihilistic position has failed. Not because it is wrong in the abstract, because it cannot account for this. The question Gravity Falls leaves you with is not a plot question. The plot resolves, at least provisionally. Bill is gone, the portal is closed, the family is reunited, Ford and Stan sail away. The question that remains, and that 10 years of continued engagement with the material suggests, has not been answered to everyone's satisfaction, is the question about Ford's arc and what it means for people who share something of his shape. Was it worth it? The journals, the research, the 12 doctorates, the relentless pursuit of knowledge at the cost of every relationship that tried to reach him. Was the accumulation of all that understanding worth what it took to accumulate? Is there a version of Ford's life where the same gifts, organized differently, around connection rather than isolation, produce the same understanding without the 30 years of mutual destruction? The show's answer is not quite yes and not quite no. It is something more careful and more honest than either. The work was real, the knowledge was real, the journals were real and worth having, and none of that required the isolation. Ford did not need to be alone to be brilliant. He was alone because the wound from Glass Shard Beach went unaddressed for long enough that he called it independence and built a philosophy around it. The isolation was not a feature of the research, it was a feature of the wound, and the wound was what Bill found and used. The show does not say that knowledge is bad or that intellectual life is corrupting. It does not say that Ford should have been less curious or less rigorous. It says that knowledge is not a substitute for connection, that you cannot fill the gap in a human life with understanding however wide that understanding becomes. Ford mistook the lining for the thing. He filled the space where Stan used to be with doctorates and journals and research, and eventually with the fraudulent partnership of a nihilistic triangle, and the filling was real and impressive, and it left the gap intact. The thing the show finally gives Ford is not more knowledge. After everything, after 30 years and Weirdmageddon and the golden statue and the memory gun, what the show gives Stanford Pines is his brother, Stan, a boat, the ocean, the sailing dream, 30 years overdue, and finally, improbably, real. Not because the universe repays this kind of persistence, not because nihilism is wrong in some philosophically certifiable way, but because Stan spent 30 years working toward a machine he barely understood for a person who blamed him for the worst thing that ever happened to them, and did it out of love. And love is the thing that nihilism identified as the source of suffering, and then abandoned, and the show is saying that the abandonment was the mistake. The suffering that comes with love, the 30 years of guilt and the willingness to have your memories erased, is not a price to be avoided. It is the evidence that the thing was real. Stanford Pines spent his adult life building knowledge and eroding connection. The thing the show gives him, at the very end, is the connection. The specific, unreasonable 30 years proven love of his twin brother, and Stanford Pines, who walked toward nihilism's door without knowing where he was walking, turns around. 8 years after the finale, the books still sell and the questions the show raised are still being worked through. The Cipher hunt drew the audience out of their houses. The Book of Bill put the antagonist in the first person and made a bestseller list nearly a decade after his defeat. That is a strange and specific kind of afterlife for an animated show, and it is worth pausing over. The people who have kept the show alive are the people the show was speaking to most directly, and I do not think this is a coincidence. If Ford is a warning about what happens when a certain kind of mind organizes its whole life around understanding and calls the resulting isolation independence, then the people most likely to hear the warning are the people who have felt the pull of that same organization in themselves. The show gave them a way to see it from the outside, not as a diagnosis, not as a lecture, but as a story about someone they could recognize, walking a road they could recognize, and being met at the end of it by a brother he did not deserve. There is a specific quality of relief in seeing your worst tendencies rendered accurately, made visible in a way that does not shame you for having them. Gravity Falls does this for a certain kind of viewer, and the viewers who received it that way have not let go of it. What I find striking, looking back at the show and the reception it has had, is how few of its imitators have been able to reproduce what it did. Plenty of shows since have tried the trick of hiding puzzles for their audience. Plenty have tried the trick of taking children's animation as a vehicle for real emotional weight, and some of them have done individual pieces of it well. What almost none of them have done is combine the puzzle with the emotional weight, so that the decoding practice and the philosophical argument reinforce each other, so that the audience trained to read closely for hidden information becomes the audience prepared to read closely for hidden feeling. Alex Hirsch did something specific there, and the specificity is part of why the show has aged as well as it has. What does it mean that the most serious treatment of nihilism as a personal and philosophical danger in American popular culture in the 2010s was an animated children's show on Disney Channel? I think about this sometimes, not dismissively, not as a curiosity about genre, but as a genuine question about where serious ideas go when the mainstream literary culture is not receiving them. Gravity Falls arrived during a period when children's animation was rebuilding its ambition, when shows like Adventure Time and Steven Universe were discovering that young audiences could sustain emotional and thematic complexity far beyond what the previous generation of animated television had attempted. But Gravity Falls went further than almost any of its contemporaries in engaging with identifiable philosophical traditions, with questions that have formal names in philosophy departments, with arguments that have been made in books for centuries. The reason it worked, the reason children watched it and adults rewatched it, and the book sold years later, and the ARG was solved in 2 weeks, is not that it made philosophy accessible in the sense of simplifying it. It is that it made philosophy personal. The question of whether anything matters, which is one of the oldest and most resistant questions in Western philosophy, is not made tractable in Gravity Falls by being translated into a simpler form. It is made tractable by being given a body, Ford's body. The body of a man who spent 30 years in the wrong direction and came back. The body of a man who wrote Trust No One and lived to have to take it back. Philosophy becomes real when it is lived, not when it is argued. Ford does not think his way out of the nihilistic endpoint. He does not read a book that convinces him. He watches his brother erase himself and holds him while it happens, and waits to see if the memories come back, and they do, and that is what changes him. Not an argument, a fact. The specific, undeniable fact that someone was willing to do that for him. The fact is more persuasive than any philosophical demonstration because it is not a demonstration of a position, it is an instance of a thing that the nihilistic position says cannot meaningfully exist, and it exists anyway, right in front of him, in the portal room of the Mystery Shack, while Weirdmageddon is still going on outside. The show is also, in a way that I think goes underappreciated, a document about what it feels like to be a particular kind of intelligent child, the kind who notices too much and cares about things too intensely, and cannot find the ordinary social world quite comfortable enough to relax in. Hirsch based Dipper on himself and Ford on what Dipper might become if the wrong things happened for long enough. This is not a coincidence or a background detail. This is the show being honest about where it comes from and what it is afraid of. The fear it is most directly addressing, under all the monsters and ciphers and dimensional demons, is the fear that the strange, brilliant, isolated child becomes the strange, brilliant, isolated adult who is alone in a shack in Oregon, writing in journals that nobody reads. The fear that the strangeness that makes you interesting as a child makes you isolated as an adult, and that the isolation produces the very outcome you were afraid of. Gravity Falls addresses this fear not by saying it is wrong to be strange or wrong to be brilliant or wrong to want to understand the universe. It addresses it by showing what happens when those qualities are not accompanied by the willingness to stay in relationship, to trust that connection is worth the cost of its vulnerability, to let someone else into the interior life that intelligence makes it so easy to inhabit alone. Ford's tragedy is not his intelligence, it is his aloneness. And the show is saying, as clearly as it knows how to say, that the aloneness was a choice, maintained across 30 years, and that other choices were always available. The boat at the end is for the kids who recognize themselves in Dipper, and for the adults who recognize themselves in Ford, and for everyone in between who has ever used the project of understanding to avoid the project of connecting. The boat is the show saying, you can still choose differently. It is not too late. Even after 30 years, even after the portal and the demon and the golden statue, even then, Gravity Falls was a children's show about